wanted me to know the first 1,000 digits. So I memorized the 1,000 digits of pi. And while you sleep, and also while you're not attending it, memory consolidation happens. Like kind of the theoretical groundwork for all the stuff we're now doing in neuroscience, that experts who are really good in something, like when they get new information, it kind of sticks the first time because it directly goes and it forms links with their long-term memory. Well, for someone who's not an expert in that field, it could be super hard to remember it because it might be complex information.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Being Yourself show, where world's renowned thought leaders and best-selling authors share their wisdom and insight to help you achieve your goal and be more productive, more fulfilled, and a better version of yourself. If you're new to this channel, then do consider subscribing for your regular dose of knowledge, inspiration, and motivation. This episode is being recorded in association with Let's Localize, the organization with a mission to foster micro contributions from communities and businesses to support schools for their need of time, skill, and money. I'm your host, Ajay Mathur, and my guest today is an award-winning neuroscientist, an author, and a globally sought-after speaker. Since 2006, he has been elected president for Memory Excel, the European Society for the Promotion of Memory. He's one of the best keynote speakers in the world and has received many awards, including the prestigious German Fünf-Sterne-Redens Prize, which kind of translates into 5-star speaker, if I'm not wrong. He has been very successful in memory sports and for many years, and he's 8-time team world champion for memory. And he's conducting scientific research in neuroscience and how memory works and its applications. He has performed in dozens of TV shows across Germany, Netherlands, Russia, China, and has got viewership of over 100 million. His work has been covered by media outlets such as BBC, CNN, NPR, Spiegel, and FM Magazine, just to name a few, and many more in German and European publications. His book, It's All in Your Head, is in German, which translates like Alles nur in meinem Kopf, yet to be translated in English. When it will, I will read it, but I have not read it yet. So please welcome the TEDx speaker and 4 times Guinness Book World Record holder for memory, Germany's superbrain, Dr. Boris Konrad. Dr. Konrad, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It must be one of the most amazing introductions I ever got. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So I wanted to know, first of all, what inspired to take memory so seriously and become a memory expert? Were you born with that exceptional skill, or you developed it? Tell us more about your journey, please.
Absolutely. Well, I was a decent student at school. I did well, but was far away from being the best in my class. And it was actually when the final exams approached, like in Germany, when you're turning 18 or 19, you have what you call Abitur, which is your final exams that will play a big role in which kind of universities you can get admitted to, or what kind of professional education you might follow up after. And I realized that my strategy of actually not learning that much and just hoping I'm good enough was fading if I wanted to do anything relevant afterwards. So the prospect of having to study a lot was not very promising. Like I wasn't really looking out for that. So when I heard there mnemonic techniques that help your memory to learn faster with less work, that was kind of exactly what I was hoping for. I already had a skeptical mind. I was always science oriented. So I was like, but if this really works, like, why didn't no one ever tell me? So I was a bit skeptical, but I wanted to know for sure if it works or not. And it didn't just work really well for me. I super highly enjoyed it. It was so much fun to do that. And for the first time in years, I actually enjoyed learning, actually so much that when I had finished my Abitur, I just went on training my memory and training it in a little more, well, you might say meaningless task, but interesting task because they're measurable. And then I discovered that there is a world of memory sports, which back then was way smaller than it is nowadays. In recent years, the sport grew considerably in countries like China, Mongolia, India, in mostly Asian countries, but also in some of the Western populations. It got decently well known in Sweden, in Germany, in the UK as well. So that's pretty nice to see. And I was quite early into this when the sport was still developing a lot. And it allowed me to quickly reach the level of the best in the world, which was highly motivating by itself. From like being a decent student to being actually top of the world in something I enjoyed doing was an experience I didn't expect so quickly. So it kind of got like, what's the term for a positive vicious circle? It's just like, the more I did it, the more people asked me about it, the more I wanted to know myself. And I was studying physics and computer science at the local university. So I was a student. Memory techniques helped me a lot to prepare for exams. So I also had the time for traveling the world to compete in memory competitions. And it just grew my interest in the topic further. Because whenever I approached a question I couldn't answer, or something I asked myself about it, like, why does it work? Like, it's not natural to think this way, you might say, because we don't know how to do it, but it does work. You can learn to think differently, and suddenly your memory works better. And there was really not much science to explain how this worked so well. So I then decided, well, if it isn't out there, I have to do this kind of research myself. And luckily, I got the opportunity, got a scholarship to do my PhD at a pretty well-known Max Planck Institute of Psychiatry in Munich in Germany, work with some top neuroscientists, get all the training I needed to learn how to run neuroscience studies, how to use technologies like fMRI to study brains and activity in brains. And well, after finishing my PhD, I then decided to take on the opportunity to, well, focus my whole life more or less on memory. I went to Nijmegen, which is in the Netherlands, 7 years ago, 2014, where I'm still working as a postdoc memory researcher at the Donnes Institute for Brain Cognition and Behavior, which is, I think, with all respect to everyone else, one of the top institutes for cognitive neuroscience we have in Europe, or maybe even worldwide. And I'm really honored that they wanted to have me and still want to have me, and that I still have the possibility to combine it with a second career as a public speaker, author, and trainer, and transfers this knowledge, because science communication always was close to my heart. And when I got to attend memory conferences as a PhD student, it was like this whole world opening up once again. Like, I studied all the self-help books and talked to other people who train memory for memory sports. But suddenly I went to memory conferences, and there were these people who studied memory for decades and knew so much about it. And I had the same question again, like, guys, why don't you tell everyone about it? Everyone needs to know this, but you just like tell yourself. So I decided this cannot be the way. We need to get this knowledge out. And that's what I still do today.
Can you tell me a couple of examples of memory sports? What kind of activities you do in that?
Well, sure. Memory sports is pretty standardized. That's the World Memory Championships. We have 10 different disciplines. So it's like decathlon and track and field, where they like throw stuff, run and jump. We have 10 disciplines. It is a few of them about memorizing digits or numbers in either the short form, a sprint, 5 minutes, or a marathon, an hour, but also in an auditive way where numbers are read out to us. But we also have more real life like tasks, like memorizing names and faces, memorizing dates, memorizing word lists. So it's a combination of 10 different tasks, testing different memory domains. All of them have in common that they kind of score you on how much you can memorize in a limited time frame. Whereas the shortest discipline we have is who's the fastest to memorize one deck of playing cards. So 52 playing cards get shuffled, and the world record by now is fairly under 20 seconds. And the longest events are the 1 hour marathon events, where we have 1 hour fixed to memorize as much as possible, either digits or playing cards within an hour.
Wow. And when you remember something like the digits of pi, that's the only thing that I could do, up to 50 digits with a technique. And I can't recite everything just like that if you ask me, but with your methods, do you remember them forever? For example, you kind of memorized tens of your credit card numbers. You have them just like that right now, or how's it?
Yeah, my credit card numbers I do. For pi, I once was asked or invited by a TV show to do something with pi, and they well, convinced me, mostly by money, to do that. I wasn't super into it because there's a number of people who really focus on memorizing pi, and I was never one of them. But they really wanted to have me and wanted me to know the first 1,000 digits. So I memorized the 1,000 digits of pi. Then this sounds amazing, but if you think that in memory sports, in my best attempt, I can get close to 2,000 digits in an hour. It was good that TV people didn't know how fast I can do that, because otherwise I might not have paid me that well. But let's get back to the topic of memorizing, because your question was if I will still know these digits now. The answer is no, I don't. Did I still know these 1,000 digits like a week, even a month later? Yes, I did. But then I decided not to spend any extra effort on it, because I didn't feel like it's valuable for me to remember 1,000 digits of pi. So I did not rehearse them. And people might now think, well, okay, if you still need to rehearse, so how useful is it? it's still super useful because you get to decide what stays in, what does not. And if you also know how to rehearse well, which goes on top of the memory techniques I mostly focus on, because rehearsal techniques just complement memory techniques. They go hand in hand and they work super well together. And we can keep talking about it. I often get frustrated when people tell me, should we teach students rehearsal techniques or memory techniques? It's like, should we teach running or eating healthy? Like, ideally do both, please. So these just go hand in hand. And if I would want to memorize 1,000 digits of pi, and I take an hour to memorize them now, I take not more than maybe 5 to 10 repetitions, rehearsals of these, and I will know them a whole year from now. And from then it's maybe rehearsing them once a year to keep them forever. So it's really not that much work. It's still a bit of work. So still, since I memorize a lot, I have to decide what's worth my time to rehearse it.
So when you say 5 to 10 rehearsals, how far those rehearsals are? So if for example, I memorized it with 2000, I can't even say it, I can remember 2000 digits of pi. So let's stay with 50 or 100. So let's say I learned 100 digits of pi. And how often do I have to do those 5 rehearsals in order to remember it long? Should it be like today, an hour later, and 2 hours later, or today and month later and 2 months later? How is that gap between rehearsals should look like?
Yeah, there's of course not a perfect universal rule. There's a number of universities around the world studying these kind of gaps. So there's specific terms for that. So it's called retrieval practice, and you've got things in space retrieval. You did something good in both of your examples, something many students miss. So when I get to speak to schools, for example, when I ask kids, when do you think you need the first rehearsal? They often think like maybe in a week, because they kind of use like every Monday I have history class. So they think like a week later is good enough. And you already got it good. And that's not enough. So first rehearsals are really early. So when I teach people in like one of my lectures, an easy example, like a list of 20 random words, people are already excited. They couldn't believe they could memorize 20 random words. Was within my speech they can. I tell them, rehearse them an hour from now. So in an hour. Rehearse them tomorrow, in a week, a month, and half a year. Like an hour, a day, a week, a month, half a year. 5 rehearsals, you will know the whole list a year from now. I promise it to you. You have to do it yourself, but occasionally I still get emails from people who said, well, I saw you speak a year ago and I just want to tell you that it actually worked. Like I didn't believe it, so I tried it out myself and you were right, it works. And I say, of course, well, these 5 repetitions for something as easy as a list of random words where I provide all the mnemonic images, 5 rehearsals are enough. For stuff maybe I learned as a student when I then followed neuroscience courses, I needed a bit more. When my wife told me we're expecting twins, I didn't need to rehearse it at all. So it depends a bit on what you want to remember.
That's a very good point, because that is such a news that you will remember it, right? And there are some memories which you will forget. For example, what you ate in the morning, versus there are some memories, although they're small, but you will remember them for a long period of time because of the impact of them. So I wanted to understand what exactly is going on in this between your ears biologically. What is the anatomy of memory? Why there are few things which don't last hours versus few memories which last forever up until you die? What is exactly the difference in your circuits in the brain?
It's still a good question. There's tons of research on that general question of what's building memory. And the main thing to realize is that a memory is not a localized information in your brain. So we often have metaphors. So we think of a hard drive. On a hard drive, you could pinpoint exactly to where this information is. That's completely impossible with the brain, not just the human brain, but with any brain. So even in animal models, we cannot pinpoint a memory to a specific location in the brain. It's sometimes called an engram, which might be a sequence, a firing pattern, something like this. But even these are not as specific that you could really say it's this one specific pattern. Certainly not for a human memory, certainly not for something you experienced. So let's look what makes a memory more memorable. Well, it's mostly a memory means there are new connections being formed in your brain. So you have all the single neurons, which might be activated by this experience you have, by the fact you're trying to remember, by the new word you just heard. Because it's in a foreign language, it doesn't mean anything to your brain yet, but you can hear it. Your brain starts to decode it, and you have a whole world of firing up in your brain. And activity in the brain means new connections. Eric Kandel is maybe one of the most famous neuroscientists in history. He even won the Nobel Prize many, many years ago for kind of proving that simultaneous activity leads to new connections. And you can translate it into simultaneous activity leads to learning, because thinking and learning in our brain are not different. It's kind of the same thing. Whenever you think, your brain is changing. When you learn, your brain is changing. So actually, thinking and learning are not really different things. So you can kind of see it as successful learning where these links were formed in a way that they stick. Because this is something people often miss. They believe once these connections are formed, they're permanent, but they're not. While you're attending something, you have working memory, kind of moderating it. You have a brain region called the hippocampus, which many people link to memory, which is super important for memory formation. It's not the hard drive. It's really clear. People who suffer from a memory, from a hippocampus lesion will suffer from a memory deficit afterwards, but they still keep earlier memories. So the hippocampus is kind of moderating all the input from a day. And while you sleep, and also while you're not attending it, memory consolidation happens. But big part of that's actually during sleep. While you sleep, in really lay terms, the brain is cleaning up. All the stuff that was formed, all the new connections that were linked, but are still really weak because they're really, really new and young. They kind of get cleaned up to like not overwhelm the whole system. So something you just learn can easily get swept away. It's of course nothing moving around. So this is just like using words you understand. It's not what's actually happening. But the idea is what's happening. You have weak new connections which can get lost. So what's staying in? Then you can see that there's a number of things that influence if something will stay or not. And we already covered one of the most important ones, emotion. Something that touched me emotionally, which can be different things. It can be fun, it can be joy, it can be excitement. It can sadly also be negative emotions, harm, sadness, and a bit also on your own state. This can even differ. So for depressed people, all the negative emotions will have a stronger effect and make a memory more durable. Well, for most people, luckily, the positive ones are as good or even better. So the claim that it's generally negative ones, that's not true, but it can be useful one. But emotion has a value. What also has a value is uniqueness. If it's something completely new, this also triggers you. On the surprising opposite end, something that super well integrates into your existing knowledge also works better. So it's not like that's only new is good. No, it's two ends. So something that's, we call it a schema, some kind of pattern of knowledge you have. If this is activated, then you just add a tiny piece of information to it. This will stick the first time. And I'm getting really long with my answer, just cut me short if you want. But Anders Ericsson in Florida, for example, who sadly passed away in 2020, was kind of the expert on expertise. He could show with models like the skilled memory theory, like kind of the theoretical groundwork for all the stuff we're now doing in neuroscience, that experts were really good in something. Like when they get new information, it kind of sticks the first time because it directly goes and forms links with their long-term memory. Well, for someone who's not an expert in that field, it could be super hard to remember it because it might be complex information. And the prime example is chess positions. He proved together with a guy called Chase that if you play chess really well, when you now see a chess position, which makes sense, which is important, which makes sense, you look at it and you remember it right away. But if it takes the same chess figures and put it on a board, and it doesn't make sense because it's maybe not even according to the rules, it would never happen like this. They cannot remember it any better than someone who has no idea about chess rules at all. So once it integrates into the knowledge, that works well as well. So there's different things that can trigger it. And to round it up, sometimes it seems to be random. Hermann Ebbinghaus, a German psychologist from the 19th century, you can call him one of the earliest cognitive neuroscientists ever, if you like, or cognitive psychologists at least. He proved his models about forgetting by himself spending hours and hours of memorizing meaningless syllables. And he proved if he memorizes hundreds of syllables, most people forget rather quickly, like within minutes or hours. But a small amount of these, for whatever reason, he will remember months later, even if he didn't rehearse in between. So a small amount of these triggered whatever he couldn't pinpoint, and we might not be able to pinpoint. It might be a chance sometimes that they still got integrated well.
So all of this is quite generic, isn't it? It's more or less the same for all brains of all the people out there. So what makes one person different than other? I mean, in your case, for example, you have done your own brain scans for research, haven't you? So I'm just curious, what did you find different in your brain versus the other people? Anything came out of that research?
So write in my book, and maybe one day you can read it in English. I make the joke, but it's completely factually true that my brain has been scanned on 4 different continents, and in all these researches, it came out at pretty much average. And if I say often enough, I'm happy with that. I am happy with that. So indeed, and it's true. But of course, I scanned more brains. I had a whole group of 28 memory athletes, which formed the population for most of my PhD research. And one of the main things we could show is that indeed the brain anatomy, the size of the brain wasn't any different. And even the size of different subparts of the brain wasn't any different, which is not completely logical. Of course, there's this really famous work with taxi drivers in London. For women and men who pass the official examination to become a driver of a black cab in London, and to my knowledge, they still do it today. I should Google it one time. I think the last time I looked it up is a couple of years ago, but I think it's still true today that they need to pass this exam, which the people preparing for it only call the knowledge, because it's that much information. But it's one big set of information, thousands of street names in London, kind of the whole map of London, including names of restaurants, famous sites, and hotels. They over and over learn again. While memory athletes learn the process of learning. They learn mnemonic techniques that allow them to encode different information all the time. This seems to be the striking difference, that overlearning the map of London actually changes the part of your brain that's relevant for map learning, but just training learning itself does not. We do, however, find differences in what we call the functional connectivity. You can translate it in a bit into the way different memory systems cooperate. So I think everyone kind of instinctively knows we don't just have one memory. We say like, your memory is good, your memory is bad. Oh, my memory could do better. But of course, we have different memory systems. Our memory for numbers or names and faces is something else than our memory for movements, for our personal experiences. So we have autobiographical memory, we have procedural memory, we have prospective memory, which is memory for things that are going to happen in the future. So there's competing memory systems. And we have shown in our research, and we published these papers about that, that we do find these differences in the functional connectivity and also in how we do believe different memory systems that often compete in memory states start to work together.
So when you say connectivity of, they found different sort of connections, or they didn't, so you said that they didn't find the sizes were more or less the same, which is kind of, which is good. It's good.
Let me just, it's really easy to answer that part. So we looked first at the size of brain regions. So that's exactly what it is. And when I say we look at connectivity, what we actually do is we take a so-called functional measurement. That it means we look at brain activity, which is again an indirect measure of where oxygen is used up in your brain. And you can use that during tasks. Like I could ask you, hey, do you want to visit me in Nijmegen? I put you in my scanner and then I give you some numbers and you memorize these, and I will try to see where your brain gets active. But you can do the same kind of measurement without a task. It's called resting state MRI. And it's really popular in recent years because it allows us to do all this kind of network analysis. So we kind of see where oxygen is used up, and then we correlate all the parts of the brain, and we see these parallel fluctuations in different systems. And this is interpreted as functional connectivity, that these regions seem to work together, that they seem to cooperate, that they seem to be connected because they always have an up and down pattern that's together. And this is a technique that's got really popular and really well studied in recent years in neuroscience that we also applied here. So when I say we find these connectivity differences, it's this kind of measure I'm talking about. So it's not during a task, it's actually at rest. So it's really about the people themselves and not just the way they memorize something.
And it seems like there is no particular place for certain types of memories, right? I mean, when I think of a song which I heard 20 years ago and kind of memorized it then, and I start singing it now, I will remember everything about that song, right? So it's been kind of stored somewhere. And there are a few things that you kind of force yourself to remember it. Yeah. Is there a different area of brain which you store some kind of passive memories? I don't know if the passive is the right word to say, but the dormant memory and somewhere you have active memory. Is there something like this between conscious and subconscious? I'm just trying to relate those two things.
I think the main idea here is to realize that when you feel you remember it, your brain is actually reconstructing it. So your brain has some fragments of memory, which it's then fitting together. So it knows a bit maybe about the song, maybe it knows a bit about the time where you were at when you first heard the song or when you fell in love with the song, and then it's kind of puzzling it back together. So instead of remembering, like retrieving an exact past, it's reconstructing from the fragments that are still there, using all the schemas you have in general. So your brain knows in general what kind of music you like, it knows in general how you react to music, it knows in general how you felt the time you were studying wherever, and then it's kind of bringing these pieces together to give you an experience of now. We actually see with the brain scanners that when someone is actually remembering something from the past, like if I tell you, for example, hey, you told me you studied German for a bit, so maybe you think back to one of the German classes you had, or if you learned on your own, like the way you did it, and then you start thinking about it, and then you will kind of remember something. But it might not be even if you describe me one very specific moment, there is not much guarantee, or even harder, it's not very likely it ever happened like this. But your brain is not puzzling together maybe 2 or 3 different moments. It has fragments of memory of to give you one congruent scene of how it probably was. And then if I ask you, maybe talking to me inspires you to pick up some German again, so you can finally read my book. Tell me how will tell me how will a German lesson look like if you take another one in a month? And then if the one you actually remembered from the past, the one I now ask you to imagine how it could be a month from now, if I compare your brain activity with these 2 really different instructions, it's actually super similar. Because even when you imagine the future, a possible future, you rely on all the scenes, the ideas you have. You rely on memories of language classes you have. You rely on the memory you still have of German and the struggles you maybe remember learning some parts of it. So even when you imagine the future, it's really, really similar for your brain than what it does when you actually remember something. This shows that we hardly have any, we have some, so it can be, but we hardly have any very specific memories that are exact like they are. It's normally always a reconstruction. And if you ask people over years, like once a year, remember whatever, you remember your first day at high school, you remember your first day at university, remember even your first kiss, even something emotional like that. You ask them every other year for a number of years. Some people did studies like this. People are really sure when you ask them, did you give exactly the same descriptions last time? Yeah, absolutely. I remember it. It was like this. And then if you read all the text, well, in some cases, you're saying they told it 10 times, it have been 10 different kisses. It cannot be the same story. But each time they felt, this is what they remembered.
That is interesting. I mean, it is now making a lot of sense that your brain starts to retrieve information and starts to construct that memory. But I didn't think it like that before. I just thought, everything is stored as it was rather than in pieces, which looks like it's been stored in pieces and then you kind of constructing it again when you want to retrieve it, which is great. So is there anything that we can do in order to improve? Because it's something that I think that some people have good memory, some people don't have that good memory, even if they try to apply a couple of more techniques. And maybe there is no certain answer to why it is, but is there a way that everybody can improve their memories, and people who are listening to this, they can apply in their day-to-day life to, remember where they kept their keys, or maybe remember 1 or 2 credit card numbers just in case in emergency you need it and you don't have the card, for example. Is there something that, workable that people can use?
Yes, yes, there is. The main technique to look into, and you might have heard the name, but few people really spend a bit of effort to practice it, is what's nowadays often called the memory palace. In scientific papers, it's called the method of loci, the method of locations, or Roman rooms, but memory palace seems to be most popular in 2021, and in scientific literature it's method of loci. This technique basically means that you prepare. This is really important because I even get students messing it up. They tell me, well, Boris, I heard about this technique before, and I'm sitting here maybe following my course and I want to apply it. So while I listen to you, I think of my apartment and I place stuff there. No, no, you got it wrong. You should have prepared locations in your apartment, which you could now apply. But if you haven't prepared it, you cannot apply it right now. You can say, well, I could use a hammer. If you don't have it, you cannot bring the nail into the wall. You have to prepare the method of loci, set up your memory palace for it to become a tool, which you can then apply afterwards. So there is some training necessary. And in our research, not because we tested if this is exactly how much you need, but just we saw this works really well. People train for 6 weeks, 30 minutes a day. 6 weeks, 30 minutes a day. That's a bit of effort, but it's doable. It enables the people on average to triple their memory in standardized memory tests, to score like ceiling scores in memory of the memory tests that are used to assess people, even at top level companies or universities. It allowed, and this is really important to the point you just asked, it allowed usually the worst performance, because yes, we had the spread as well. Of course, we had people in the initial memory tests who were super good and people in the initial memory test who were not. But it allowed all of them to massively improve from their own level. And in some studies, and actually most of the studies, at the end, after the 6 weeks, in tests like memorizing a list of words or a set of digits, the best performer, the worst performer at the beginning was better afterwards than the best performer was at the beginning. Thing is, the best performer, of course, in our group also trained, so they often were still the best at the end. But the worst improved so much, it was better than the best at the beginning. That's how much these techniques actually can help you in given tasks. Yes, it really helps you that much for memorizing pi, for example, like memorizing 100 digits and keeping them forever. This is like if you add a memory technique called major system or phonetic mnemonic major system. If you practice this one a bit, you get, a credit card is just like, it's like if I ask you, can you remember the digit 2, please? Like 16 digits, it's just like so easy. It's no problem at all. Like literally anyone can learn it in a couple of weeks to memorize a set of 16 digits in a minute and remember it forever. Like this is super easy if you know how.
Yeah, how long does it take to learn that? Sorry, I just interrupted. I was just getting curious to know the technique, if I can remember my 16 digits. Is there an easy way we can learn in 5 minutes, or it's going to take time?
Yeah, I can describe it. You cannot learn to do it in 5 minutes, but I can describe what you need to do.
Please,
I think it's the major system or the phonetic mnemonic. What you learn first is that you associate every digit with a phoneme. You can say with a letter. Depending on the letter language, it might be one letter. In German, for example, it's sometimes letters combined. And you only take the consonant sounds. So for example, 1 is T, because 1 looks a bit like a T, like a bit, right? If you write a 1 and a T, it's both like going down. So 1 is T, for example. 2 is N, because the N is like 2 feet, 2 steps down. 3 is M, because M has 3 feet, or it looks like a 3 falling over. So do you remember the letter or 1?
T.
Yes, and for 2?
N.
And 3?
M.
Okay, so you're already nearly a third of the way down. So that's awesome. And then we have vowels, A, E, I, O, U. They do not get any number. What we do have now is a system that we can translate any word into a number. So for example, if you have the word man, M-A-N, you have M is 3, A, that's a vowel, it's nothing, N is 2, right? So man would be 32. If I have the word ton, can you tell me the number?
1 and O is nothing and N is 2, 12.
Exactly. You're already on a good way to get there. So we have this system, and you learn also 4 to 9 and 0, S and Z are 0, for example. And then you can form words. If you now take your credit card, you can break it down instead of 2, 3, or 4 and look for words matching to this system. And it could be a nice puzzle game to do it for yourself. But there's also amazing tools, for example, pinfraud.com, pinfraud.com, or Numzi, Numzi, which basically allow you to put in a number, and then it looks for words based on the system for you. So you put your credit card number, and you might end up with Donald Duck eating a hamburger in Berlin, and then you can translate it because T and D is 1, N was 2, so Don, you already have 1, 2. So you find your own story, and then you picture it. It's really important. You don't just say it, don't just read it, you imagine it. You imagine what you feel, you imagine what you hear, what you smell. So make it multimodal, include all senses. And then it's a really weird but funny and memorable story. And because it's based on a code, you can translate it back. And then if you put the whole story in your memory palace, which just might be your bed, you see the whole scene I just described on your bed, then you even know where to look for it, because you go to your bed and pick up the numbers there. And if you want to be really fast at memorizing numbers and do not want to have to use such a tool, you would prepare a table from 00 to 99. So in our studies, it's what I make other people do, and in my trainings, it's what I highly recommend everyone, like any age doesn't matter. Spend that time And I claim, and I promise, actually, it's a promise, it's not a claim. If you spend the next 2 weeks, 5 minutes per day, 2 weeks, 5 minutes per day, not more, you can memorize images for every combination of 2 digits, from 00 to 99. So 0 was Z, so sauce, for example, 00. And 10 might be, for example, I have to look something in Dutch. I have my German images in mind, to tease or to toss or something like this.
Okay. Right.
So you can look up examples online over and over. There's tons of examples in English and in most other languages as well. And then you choose your own set of 100 images. You learn 10 per day. So on Monday, you do 00 to 09, which is easy because they all begin with Z. So it's sauce, and 09 might be soup. So you go from sauce to soup, the first. The next day, you go from 10 to 19. 19 might be tube or tape, something because N is P, N is P, 1 is T. So these 10 you rehearse the one from the day before. The weekend is even off. So within 2 weeks, Monday to Friday, and then again Monday to Friday, you have 100 images in your head. And now when you get a set of numbers, which might be your credit card number, which might be numbers describing something more meaningful, you split them up in groups of 2, you remember your images, and then you place these either in your memory palace, if you know the memory palace technique, or you would just make a funny story out of it. You link them by forming a funny story. Then you provide it, your brain, you provided the numbers to your brain. In a way, your brain already knows what to do with it. Your brain doesn't really have a good system to work with numbers. It's not made for it. It's not evolved to memorize numbers. It evolved to memorize experiences. So if you transform your credit card number in a really weird experience, your brain says, I know what to do with an experience. That's easy. And then if you also know the code, when you remember the experience, you can translate it back to the number.
Yeah, thank you, Boris. For the people who are listening to this, in the last 3 minutes, whatever Boris has said, rewind it and watch it. It really does work. And I could understand it because I know a little bit about mnemonics, so I could pretty quickly able to link numbers and words. But I'll put all the links, and I never knew about the website, which gives you if you put the numbers and it gives you names and words. I'll definitely put that in the link. So I would encourage everybody listening to try these mnemonic techniques. They are wonderful if you practice them. I'm guilty of not being practicing, but I know about them. They really work. And you can remember your credit card numbers. You don't have to carry it all the time nowadays.
If you listen, and maybe you put it to the show notes, to the links, app.memoryleak.com. app.memoryleak.com. It's where you can play memory, which for me back then, Memory Leak didn't exist, but there was a somewhat similar tool. So what motivated me a lot at the beginning was, I gave a story how I began. When I got into memory sports, I find this trainer, which is like a computer game. You kind of advance in levels. You start at level 1, and maybe without a memory technique, you can reach level 3 and 4. And if you just learn a bit about it, you can only do level 5 and 6. Then it motivates you to get all the way to 10. I find it an amazing tool. And you can also play with your friends. You can play with each other. It has a sports component. And if you don't like competition, you just train for yourself. So I highly recommend app.memoryleak.com.
Okay, thank you. And definitely practice makes permanent, right? So if you do practice, then you'll evolve. Let's segue a little bit from memory to speaking, because you're a 5-star speaker, as we know. And memory palace, the technique that you have just told, I have heard about it a lot when it comes to remembering your speeches. Now, when you're on TED stage, you have to talk for 17 minutes. Clearly, you can't remember every sentence. You can't mug it up. If you do, you will fail probably. So you probably use these kind of techniques like memory palace. So could you explain memory palace in relation to remembering your speech when you're on stage? How would you put it in that memory palace thing?
Sure. So when I prepare a speech, for example, my TED talk, my TEDx talk, I wanted to have it pretty accurate. Like, let's say, for example, this morning I was invited to give a keynote speech for an IT summit on cloud computing, and I spoke about the neuroscience perspective on artificial intelligence and the question if we as humans are staying smarter as robots. By the way, my answer is yes, as long as we train our memory, but that's a different speech. So I have such a speech, which might be an hour long or 35 minutes this morning. Here, I do not want to memorize every sentence. It would get unnatural. Here, I prefer to remember all the things I want to say. So for a speech of 35 minutes, I maybe only have 30 or 40 keywords for the things I want to mention, which might be the different things I want to address. And in my case, I always try to be entertaining. So it might be some keynotes for some keywords for some jokes I want to make, some entertaining examples I want to present. For a TEDx talk, actually, even though it was just 12 minutes or 17 minutes to ahead, I actually have at least a key image, a keyword for every 30 seconds. So I still don't memorize it verbatim, but since I rehearse the speech quite a few times, it gets close to that without feeling unnatural. I don't want to look like a puppet reading off a teleprompter. I still want to give a natural speech, but I want more or less remember every sentence I planned in because it's more specific and you worked with speech preparators for TEDx are really keen on helping you and also keen on you making use of that help because they have a format in mind. They want you to fit it. So here what I do is I use a memory palace, which might be a room, which in my case often is rooms I lived in, apartments, places, but also some outer locations. For example, I studied in Reading for a while and I had routes through my student apartment across campus, but also, for example, in Oxford, when we went there to visit it with all these lovely old buildings and tons of them in London, along the Thames and so on. It can be really different places. Now, let's say I have a speech like this morning. I began it actually with a little joke about how tattooing your partner's name on your body might be fashionable, but not a good memory aid. So I might picture leaving my student's apartment and seeing someone covered with tattoos of names on them in the front door. So just an opening joke to set the mood. And then I always like my speech to go to the next stage, to go to neuroscience by saying, please fold your hands like this, form a fist, two fists like this. Look at it now, what you see now. That's a nice simple model of your brain. So that's about the size of your brain. And I'll tell a bit more about that. So I might see someone standing at the lamppost holding it with two hands. So it has nothing to do with the brain, but I remember, oh yeah, I have an example of two fists. So if I see someone standing, hugging kind of the lamp post on the tree, on the street, I know this was for, okay, telling them now about the model of the two hands. And then this morning, the next thing I talked about was aplysia and how Eric Kandel studied neurons in aplysia and activity and firing patterns. So aplysia is actually a snail. That's something I knew. So maybe the next stop on my memory palace might be a bus stop. But instead of people are waiting at the bus stop, I see this huge snail. And there's actually people standing around it to applaud it. Because aplysia is a name, but there's just people applauding the snail. Super weird saying. But if I would ever come across a bus stop where people are applauding a snail, this is a memory I would never ever forget, neither would you. It's not happening, of course. It might be a weird dream, like if you had a too high fever, but it's something you would certainly remember forever. And if you provide your brain with such an image, your memory with such an image, it will also remember. And of course, later on, I know now this didn't really happen, but after telling about this model with my hands, I'm now going to tell them about the research done on aplysia, why a snail is so important for neuroscience, and how Eric Kandel rightfully won his Nobel Prize studying neurons in aplysia. So I'm preparing these images. And now when I'm on stage and giving my speech, or this morning in COVID times in front of a camera, I can go through this route. And I even have to smile, which is always good as a speaker. That is a weird, funny image, but I know exactly what I want to say. And even if it's a more interactive class, if it's a lecture I'm giving to students at our university, they might have a question early on, like already at brains, they might wonder, but is it true that we have two halves of our brains? They ask me something about it. I have the prior knowledge, I can answer it. And now I wonder, what did I want to say next? Wait, I was at the lamppost, and then now I go to the bus stop. So I just know where to look. Oh yeah, there was a snail. And then I'm back in my talking. So this helps really well. And if you practice your speech once or twice, even if you have an image for every 30 seconds of speaking, for 17-minute talks, it's just 35 images, 34, 35 images. You can easily place that even in the most tiny apartment you might be living in. And then you're just retrieving these images and they will remind you of what you wanted to say.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I've never tried this technique in my speeches. I've done many speeches, but I'm curious. I will use it at some point. I'm still not that confident in using it, just in case I forget what did I give in that corner, might be in trouble.
Can I say one thing? It might happen. You might be nervous, but then you forgot what was in the corner, but then you see in your head, you see the plan standing next to it and you know what goes on. Well, if you just, it happened again a few days ago. Actually, I was watching an online conference and one of the speakers was really smart, like not something stupid, someone really smart, but he obviously had a blackout. Like he tried to go back to the beginning of the sentence 3 times and then just excluded himself, and someone asked him a question to try to get him back off track, and it was really embarrassing because even if you prepared it well, and if you don't have a memory aid and then you black out, you don't even know where to look. You just start to panic even more. Your amygdala starts to fire, your panic mode goes off, and you cannot remember anything anymore at all. With such memory patterns, even if you forget one image, well, so be it. You wanted to say something about what you placed in the corner, you didn't, but you know what's as an expectation. You're never having this complete blackout anymore, because even if one image is gone, you just retrieve the next one. Maybe this one image wasn't funny enough. And if you rehearsed it once or twice, even that to happen is extremely unlikely.
Yeah. And what do you think, because of so much of reliance on technology, you don't have to remember anything really, you just go to Google, start typing and it's just there. Because of that, are we becoming less competent in terms of memorizing things, or are we getting better? What do you think?
Well, research indicates quite some of us are getting worse because we rely on technology too much. It's not happening to all because you can use it in a smart way. And one of the things that might be worthwhile to realize is you can only come up with an idea. You can only have some innovative thoughts if something is there. If you only looked up the information, even if you're smart, it can link it on the spot to answer your teacher's question or your boss's question. You're not actually working on the material. It's not staying there. You're never building up the expertise, and as Ericsson talked about in 50 years of his research, that will enable you to get smarter and smarter on the topic by just integrating everything you hear once. But if you don't build up this expertise, you won't build up the ability to be innovative, to be creative in that field. So memory is really necessary for high cognitive processes. And as I said, thinking and learning aren't really different. So I would say, in particular in these times, it's really valuable to still build up on purpose these brain networks that allow you to deal really well with even complex information. If you just look it up, this can be dangerous. So there's a number of studies. It's often difficult, of course, correlation and causality. If students are just getting less good at different things because other circumstances changed, but it also seems to be correlated with media use. And so it's always this, correlation does prove causality, but it also does not exclude it. And a number of studies indicating we should be a bit more careful on how we use media and what we look up and what we might also still try to remember. That I highly advocate using your memory in a smart way.
Yeah, totally agree. And there is always merit in remembering things, even though it's available on Google and all. But the more information you have in brain, the better analytics you can prepare, in terms of other things like analyzing something or having a decision making. So it's more information out there already is better in doing all those things. So this is going to be a very interesting conversation, but I'm just being mindful of time. And I will ask you one question, which I ask all my guests, which is, what do you think are the 3 top skills that we should all have, but our schools are not teaching?
Well, one is the skill of learning itself. So I would reduce it to memorization skills, retrieval skills. And the third one is what I would call like metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking. Like I could easily have left schools if I didn't discover myself with the belief in a fixed skill set I have. Because teachers, not on purpose, but they just told me, oh, you're good at that because I did well in a math test. Or you're not good in English. Actually, it was nearly failing school because of my English. And I believed I'm just not good in English. If my English teacher hears me now, he probably still will complain about the way I pronounce z and so and z, but you might be impressed because discovering my abilities helped me to realize I can basically learn whatever I want to learn and not what's given. So I would say memorization techniques, rehearsal techniques, and a belief in that you can learn whatever you want.
Thank you very much for sharing that. So now that you have 4 Guinness Book of World Records and you have authored a book, and I think you're writing another book now, what is your plans going forward?
I highly enjoy, and I'm really grateful that I got into a position where I could turn my passion into my profession. So I really hope that I can still keep transferring knowledge to the public, neuroscientific knowledge, memory knowledge, but also in a broader sense. I'm a father now of 4 kids, so the times I'm chasing for Guinness records are more of the past. So I still enjoy memory competitions, but I'm not competitive at the World League anymore. Other people took over, and that's totally fine. Like as in any other sport, I was at the top of my sport for more than a decade, and that's That's good. So I'm now focusing more on the speaking, on the knowledge transfer, and still also learning everything I can for myself. For example, by observing my kids, not just teaching them something I know, but I can learn so much from them. That's amazing.
Yeah, can't agree more. Okay, thank you. And finally, how can people reach you?
So my name is Boris Konrad. Konrad is okay. BorisKonrad.com would be my webpage. I'm also on many social media platforms and at least occasionally check them. So if I don't get back to you within a day, please don't be upset. If I don't get back to you within a week, totally feel free to remind me. Sometimes I'm just busy. I might have missed it. So you can find me on LinkedIn or Facebook. I'm not on TikTok, so sorry for that. But Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram would be fine, for example. I would be happy to link. So please do me a favor. Let's connect on there.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Conrad. It was really interesting talking to you. And thanks a lot for your time and coming in here and sharing your insight about memory. Thanks a lot.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
And guys, if you are looking to learn more about memory, the subject that fascinates me always, what goes between these two ears, do check his website. I'm going to put the link down there. And if you have not yet done so and you found this episode useful, then please do consider subscribing to this channel. And don't forget to hit the bell icon because that's when you will get the notification for all my future videos. So I will see you again with another interesting guest. Until then, you take care and keep learning. Bye-bye.